Good afternoon, everyone. The timing here is excellent. TEA has just released the 2026 A through F ratings for 1,202 school districts in over 9,105 campuses. TEA reports that 85% of its campuses received a C or better, and that there are some very compelling stories out there right now, including San Antonio ISD, Austin ISD. Austin ISD is facing potential state intervention for Burnett and Webb middle schools. They have received ratings of F for the fifth consecutive year, while Houston ISD state takeover remains under scrutiny. Texas doesn't have a school problem, everybody. It has a student opportunity problem. This shouldn't make anyone uncomfortable. What happens to the children who are sitting in schools that have been struggling year after year? Texas schools are failing our children, but who's being held responsible? Who's being held accountable is the main question. So let me just start by asking you this question. What happens to a child, think about this, when the school they're attending isn't giving them what they need to succeed? Not for 1 year, not for one testing cycle, but year after year, they're continually not there and able to meet the needs of these children. Because that's the conversation I want us to have today. I'm not here to attack teachers. I'm a big advocate of teachers. I'm not here to attack parents. I'm not coming here to attack children. I'm here to bring up, quite honestly, I think our children are the ones who have been failed the most. And it's our job to make sure that we're doing the things that we need to be doing to make them better academic learners. I'm talking about something much more bigger. I'm talking about the responsibility that we have to, as a state, to make sure that every child in Texas, regardless of their zip code, their family income, or the school they happen to attend, they need to have equal access to a quality education. And when a school continues to struggle, we have to be willing to ask, at what point are we going to stop explaining the failure and start fixing it? Because right now, Texas has thousands of schools and more than 1 million children or so whose educational future depends on the decisions that we make today. So therefore, I'm wondering, so what are the numbers? So, the numbers don't lie. So I've done some research. And so the Texas Education Agency has just released the 2026 A through F accountability rating. So more than 9,000 campuses. Remember when I told you earlier, it says that 85% of the campuses received an A through F rating, acceptable academic performance, or a C or higher. That's important to note because we should acknowledge schools that are doing well. But we also need to celebrate those teachers who are doing getting the results that they deserve and that these kids deserve. We should also celebrate our principals and superintendents who are out there turning schools around. But this is where I want to stop for a minute. I want to talk about the 15% of the 9,105 campuses, roughly. That's about 15% of 9,000. That's roughly about 1,366 schools per se. That's not a rounding error. That's more than 1,000 campuses that did not receive a C or better. And that's deplorable. And behind every one of those campuses are children who don't get to say, I'm going to transfer to a better school. I mean, that would be an option, right? And so they don't get to say, I'm going to move to a different neighborhood. That they don't have those options. So, and they also don't get to say, I'm going to wait to see if these adults are going to figure it out. It's up to us as educators to figure this out, because they're living it right now. They're thrown into the thrust of these ailments and these things that we're dealing with education right now. Every year that a child falls behind is a year that we cannot go back and get. Every year. So this is not I remember, you guys, I said this is not about blaming teachers. I want to make something very, very clear. Teachers are not the enemy. In fact, many teachers are working miracles. Every single day in that classroom, they're buying supplies with their own money. They're putting up with behavioral issues. They're staying after school working late. They're putting the work in. They're tutoring children. I actually, the past couple of years, I was tutoring in a local school district myself, trying to help low performing kids in the 5th grade, trying to get them to be able to advance to 6th grade. So they're teaching our children, but maybe dealing with circumstances out of school that most adults couldn't imagine. So when I talk about failing schools, I'm not talking about failing teachers. I'm asking whether or not we've created systems and leadership structures, support mechanisms, and accountability necessary for those teachers to succeed. Because there is a difference, a very, very big difference. You can have extraordinary teachers working inside a system and that is not producing extraordinary results. But when that happens, we have to look beyond the classroom and we have to look at leadership. We have to look at what drives the curriculum. We have to look at who is embracing all of these different interventions. We have to look at attendance. We have to look at all of these things that are culminating around why our children are not being successful. My biggest pet peeve, and you've heard me on my podcast before, we have to look at literacy. If our children can't read, they can't do math. If they can't read, they can't do science. We have to look at special education also. We have children out there with special needs. It doesn't necessarily have to be a disability. It could be dyslexia. They could have dyslexia. They could have ODD. They could have a variety of different things. We have to start looking at where our money is being spent. Are we investing in those programs to ensure that our children are going to be successful? When a school fails a child, we don't get to do a do-over with them. There's no do-overs. So here's the part that bothers me the most. And I know I'm probably talking way too much, but we're going to have to talk about these accountability ratings as if they're just not numbers on a spreadsheet. They're not. So an A is an A B is a B, a C is a C, a D is a D, and an F is unacceptable. But let me tell you something. Those letters represent children. A third grader who cannot read at third grade level doesn't get to stay in the third grade forever until he figures out how to read. A fifth grader struggling with mathematics doesn't get another 5 years to catch up. Do y'all see where I'm going with this? A freshman who is already significantly behind doesn't have time to recover. So, and eventually, when that child becomes a high school senior, don't you see where I'm talking about? There's a snowball effect. And suddenly we're asking, why isn't this student college ready? Well, then not long ago, I read an article where this guy was sitting in the classroom in Houston, Texas, crying because his children were illiterate. So why aren't our children prepared for the workforce? Why are they struggling? Well, maybe we should have asked those questions 10 years ago, 10 years earlier. So let's look at what's happening. We're going to have to take a look at how far we're going to see how serious we want to become about making a change with what's going on in our schools today. Thank you for joining me. I'm Carolyn with Educated and Unfiltered. I will be back to extend this conversation because I do want to talk about what's going on in our schools in San Antonio, Texas, and also how can we do better as an educational institution and debate our accountability system and make sure that we're doing what it takes to make sure that our children are learning and achieving at the level that they deserve to be taught at. Thank you for joining me, and I'll be back soon.